Hey y'all, it's Lissa. Today I'm going to do something different for my Let's Color video series. I'm going to be coloring the Unforgettable Elephant by Wplus9. I'm doing this in no lines. Normally I wouldn't do a voiceover for a Let's Color video, but many of you have asked to see one, and I also figured I could probably try to tell you what is going on in my brain as I color. First, what you saw, I was using my lightest marker to map out where I want my shadows. I do this so that way I can go in right afterwards with my darkest. There are going to be many layers in this. I have now mapped out, I have gone over the lightest with my darkest, and now with the next number down, I am blending it out a little bit, not too much. With it being many layers, I will extend the color each time, but it will continue to get a little bit darker. Now I'm using T2. At this time, I thought T2 was going to be my second lowest number. Because I'm using the very light ink that's Memento to color with, to color onto, it's not technically no lines, you just cover up your lines. The T1 that I was going to use was too light and you could still see the purple line, which I didn't want. I've gone over, that was the first layer. Now I've started the second layer, where now I'm going in and I'm strengthening those shadows. This way you start to really tell, it really starts to come to life. You see a lot more contrast because it's not done yet. And now I'm taking the T4 and pulling those out just a little bit. Basically, it's toning down the T5. The problem with doing it my way is you can very quickly gunk up your paper with your darkest color, so you have to be careful with that. I decided to, I believe this is T3, and now I'm working on T2 to go on ahead, and I figured at this point that yeah, I should probably make T2 my lightest color. But as you can see, I'm coloring up to the edges, just making sure that I don't go over. If I do go over, I do have a fix for that. You'll see that in a bit. Just making sure that each line is covered and as smooth as possible. I'm using on my T5, this is layer 3 beginning, I'm using on my T5 marker, I have a little, at the very tip, every once in a while when your marker starts to get old, you will have a, I guess, little thread come off. And I actually use this thread to help me get into the very smallest places. And as you can see, I use very small, fine strokes, and I still have not completely filled in the elephant's head because I'm wanting to keep that contrast by darkening up everything and then having one part be the lightest. And I'm not quite sure exactly if I'm happy with the shading I'm doing. Whenever you look at the two different parts, like his two ears, the back ear, there may not be a shadow there technically, but your mind will see a line if you look at them in real life. So that is why I make the extra little line, but I don't do it around everything, and that's one of the things that makes mine different. So now I'm just going over and filling in everything because I'm liking how he looks. And I'm going in once again with that T5, and I am darkening up the shadows that I want the deepest. That was it for the head. So now I'm going to go move on to the body. I only work in very small parts. I'm laying out my shadows once again with T0. This way, if I don't like it, I can change it because he's definitely going to be darker than T0. And one of the ways you can tell something is in front of something else is the thing in the front will be a little bit lighter, whereas the thing in the back will be a little bit darker. So I notice this in real life just because I have no depth perception, and I have had to figure out my whole life how to tell depth by ways other than your mind automatically calculating out depth. So I've noticed it by color. I just took my T5 and went over the edges that I wanted. Now I'm using my T4 and pulling that out just a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the head, where I only pull it out a little bit each time. It does add a lot more ink to the paper, but it also helps with your contrast in the end. And it gives you a little bit more wiggle room for if you make mistakes. That front foot that's in the back, right now I have it shaded pretty light. As you look at the light source, it should be darker, but you don't want to have two really dark lines next to each other, otherwise you will lose detail and won't be able to tell where one begins and one ends. So in a minute I'll go through and I'll decide what to do about darkening that up, because it does need to be darkened up. Now I'm taking my T5 again and going over. I go over these images multiple times, and I think even in between filming I went over it a couple times. I just keep going because sometimes things don't look right. To me, this is, you could have stopped a while ago. But to me, it's deep and you can see the depth to it, but you can't see enough depth for my taste. So I'm going back in and making it a little bit darker and adding a little bit more of the shadow, and I'm still leaving white areas because I want to have that one area be a true T2 rather than a T2 layered upon 3 layers of T2, which would actually make it a little bit darker. So now I have figured I like the body, so I went on ahead and filled it in, and now I'm going again once again with that T5, and I'm going over and I'm strengthening those shadows, because that's what tells your mind where one part ends and another part begins. And if you have contrast, it makes it really look like it pops out. So I go over all of my images quite a bit, and you have to be very careful, otherwise you can quickly gunk up your paper. And usually I end up taking it to the point where it just almost gets gunked up. But here I decided to extend the shadow coming from his rear because it wasn't looking right to me. It wasn't looking round enough. So I extended that and then decided I liked it. And now I am just going over everything and making sure it's all blended out. Things are highlighted that I want. Things that are supposed to be dark are dark. And I wanted to do the tail. I'm using very small strokes and the very tip of my marker to do this, so that way I can get a very fine line. To me, that's very important for it. Now is where I go through and I fix up my mistakes. I'm using my 0 marker. Whenever you push your 0 marker on white paper towards your color, it will actually make a little bit of a line as it pushes it. this is what I use to help strengthen that and smooth out my lines. You become really good with your zero marker whenever you do this, and it also helps get rid of some of the harsh lines that from where you've accidentally colored out. So there are ways to fix it, and this just also helps redefine that line. Now I am taking my .05 Copic multiliner and drawing it in his eye. I don't do that beforehand, and I don't do it with a Copic marker because it may bleed. I'm also grabbing my Jelly Roll white gel pen so that I can dot his eye. I get the smallest dots with it. For the balloon, I decided to go in ahead and color it in using my oranges. I'm using YR04, YR07, and YR09. First, I went over and defined the edges with the YR04. Now I am taking my YR09. Usually I used to go my lightest color and then just jump straight to my darkest color. Then I don't end up adding too much of my dark because I'm too afraid to over darken it. I'm blending all this out with the YR07. I'm also going around the edge, giving a little bit of space afterwards so that way it appears that there's light reflecting all around. He's supposed to be outside playing with his balloon, so there would be light all around. And I'm going in with my YR04. I'm not liking that blending, so I'm going in and doing tip to tip with YR07. Now I have decided I like that a little bit better, so I'm going to go ahead and go fill it in. And now it looks streaky to me, so I can't leave it alone, and I have to go on ahead and go in again. And I'm deepening up my shadows, making them more sharp. And then I'm doing tip to tip to blend that out evenly between YR09 and YR07. And then I'm using YR07 to extend that shadow just a little bit more. And then I will do tip to tip with YR7 and YR04, so that way I can have that mixture of colors and still blend it out. At the very end of coloring each image, I will go around and just take my lightest marker and go around the edge, just making sure that I am not out of the lines and strengthening that it is a smooth line. There I used the colorless blender to make a highlight on the marker or on the balloon. I didn't like it, so I colored it in, which made it look darker. So I did it again with the colorless blender and it made it even more dark. So I decided to just leave that there and I'll do a white spot. And on this one you also saw me use the zero marker to do my cleanup around the edges to make those edges crisp. Now I have a Copic multiliner. I am going to be coloring a sky over this later. So using the Copic multiliner, I drew in the string to my balloon. I used my white gel pen to draw a highlight on my balloon. You see the finished image here, or the finished card. I wanted to say thank you for watching. Please be sure to visit my blog. Please also be sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.